Hey everybody, welcome back to our demo videos. In this third week, we're covering citing and measuring tools for better representational drawing. We're going to use a variety of techniques that really help with the second stage of the drawing as we've established it so far. The first one, we start with a gesture. The second one, we establish an underdrawing and we start to get our shapes really a little bit more nailed down and correct by using measuring techniques. And the third stage, we do our finish work on top of that underdrawing. These tools and techniques are part of a larger way of seeing that we like to call the perceptual grid. It's a collection of ways of seeing that help us take internal measurements and proportions within a still life or within really anything to get accurate measurements that we can use to transfer on our paper. So I've marked off the 6 different things that we're going to cover, the 6 different tools we're going to use to get better underdrawings. Now, I should say that when students get to this stage in the course, there can really be 2 reactions. So if you have a lot of drawing experience, sometimes students want to say, oh, these techniques, they're really not for me. I have a good eye, I can put things where they're supposed to be, and I think I have a moderately good way of describing the information in front of me. But what if that's not enough? What if we want to get a fidelity of representation, of accuracy that is unmistakably correct? That's where these techniques come in. So I want you guys to approach this video like you really don't have any experience. If you're coming in new, great, they're going to be all new tools for you. But if you're coming in with a lot of confidence in the way that you know how to draw, we are going to practice undoing some of that, and we're going to try this. It's going to be hopefully revolutionary for you in the way that you measure the things in front of you. Or if you're already doing some of them, then it will expand your abilities. So in this first example, we're going to be talking about citing. That's the number one way that we're going to measure internal proportions within our still life or within whatever we're drawing. And we do that by using the pencil. You've probably seen artists do this before, where they'll grip the pencil, they'll hold it at arm's length, and they'll mark it off with their thumb on the pencil. And what they're doing is they're measuring something from the tip of the pencil to their thumb, and they're using that as a guide. So here's the example that we're going to use. Here's my still life. I hold up my pencil and I use my arm at full length, right? So if we put our arm at half length, it's not going to be the same every time. But if we fully extend our arm, this is going to work. So let's take a proportion here. I want to know how tall this S form is compared to my roll of ribbon here. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use my pencil to measure the ribbon. So holding my arm at full length, I place the tip of my pencil at the tip of the ribbon and my thumb at the bottom of the ribbon. Now that's transferable if I keep my arm at full length. I'm going to place it up against the S, and I'm going to see, okay, my pencil point touches right about at the bottom of this mesh here. So I'm going to say my S form is about 1.5 ribbons tall. Okay, so now when I come down to my paper, I can take those proportions that I've learned from the still life, my ribbon to my S, and apply them on my drawing. This works similarly for horizontal proportions too. Artists will hold their arm out again at full length, and they'll use their pencil and their thumb to capture width measurement. This time I'm going to measure the width of my hurricane lantern up here and compare it to the Catan box that it's sitting on, the front edge of the Catan box. So I'm asking myself, how many lanterns wide is my Catan box? Let's see. I'm going to measure it from bottom corner to bottom corner. So that corner to here is about that distance. Now again, I'm keeping my finger locked on the pencil there, and as long as my arm is at full extension, this is transferable. That's one pencil length to about the letter N, plus another pencil length and maybe some change to this corner here. So my Catan box is like maybe 2.1 or 2.2 pencil lengths 2.1 or 2.2 hurricane lamps wide. So now I can take that knowledge and I can apply it straight onto my drawing. That way my hurricane lamp doesn't wind up weirdly skinny on top of my Catan box or weirdly wide on top of my Catan box. So this is a vertical treatment and a horizontal treatment. I'm putting in the lines for my board game box. And the first thing I notice is that I did not take a measurement for how tall my box is versus how wide it is. That can be an extraordinarily useful measurement for internally figuring out just in one object, what are the proportions? So for my Catan box, I take some ad hoc measurements as quickly as I can, and I discover that the board game box is about 4.5 times as long as it is tall. So I make little tick marks, I measure it out, and that helps me know where to put the last line to make it a three-dimensional object. I extend the top of the board game box back, preparing to place the hurricane lamp on top of it, and I add the second box underneath the first one. Now it's time for the hurricane lamp. I put my best guess of where it starts on the left side, and then I remember that my board game box is about 2.1 or 2.2 hurricane lamps wide, so I halve that distance and decrease it a little bit, and discover that my hurricane lamp is about that wide compared to my box. Let's check that against the still life. Yep, that looks right to me. So we'll move on. I continue to add my hurricane lantern and put in the structure as it moves upward like a cylinder. That about covers our use of sighting. Sighting is a very flexible tool, especially when you need a really accurate measurement. That brings us to our second tool that we're going to use today to measure and understand our still life, and that's angle finding. Now, these board game boxes in my previous drawing were at this, sort of slight oblique angle, the Carcassonne box even more so, and they're obviously not parallel to the edges of my paper. So we've got to figure out a way to reproduce those angles. And the way we're going to do that is with our graphite pencil. This time we're going to use the pencil almost like the hands of a clock to figure out exactly what angle is in front of us. We match it with our pencil and then we mentally log it away so we can transfer it down onto our paper. This time I decide to make a generalized gesture sketch before I really begin. Very quickly I pencil in the really rough forms of those board game boxes. Now, they're not totally accurate. I'm just getting a rough idea, and we're going to correct those angles using angle finding. So let's look up to my still life and see what we're working with. So we've got our Catan box, right? For the box underneath, the Carcassonne box, I can see this bottom angle I'm working with and this top angle here, as well as these two angles over here, which matches almost this back one back there. I'm going to start using my pencil on this angle. I'm going to call that, let's see, if this is 3 o'clock, I'm going to call that 3:30. So I look down to my paper and I see where it is here, and I put in that 3:30. I look back up and I do the same for down here. Now notice, a lot of beginning drawing students would say this angle and this angle are the same. You're going to find that the ones closer to your horizon line is at your eye level, are actually less steep than the ones down here. It's something to keep in mind as we go. So I put in my bottom line for the Carcassonne box, and I move on my merry way. Now, my angle finding has led me to put these two tilts in like this, but you can see here I'm already learning something. Those angles don't intersect my Catan box in the right place, so I'm challenged here. I have to replace that edge from my gesture drawing and figure out a new normal for this box. It wasn't where I thought it was. It doesn't go back that far, does it? And that's really it. That's the basic technique of angle finding. You're going to use it constantly, and if you're not using it, then really ask yourself, am I getting these angles right? Now, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, and I'll be using the same drawing to explain our third technique. Technique number 3 is, again, really simple. We're calling it dropping verticals and horizontals. What we mean by this is from any point in our still life, we can use the human eye's very innate ability to see complete vertical and complete horizontal and use those almost as guides for our future lines and for our compositional understanding. So you can see that I've just dropped 2 verticals off the bottom corners of my hurricane lantern, and I'm able to subdivide that Catan box now to this extended vertical. Basically, it's like casting an extension off a line that already exists perceptually in reality. So by extending those points, I can use them as inferences. For instance, where on the bottom box, the Carcassonne box, the blue one, does my hurricane lantern hit? I can even use the text on the box or things like that to help gauge. At this point in the drawing, I start to extend multiple items. You can see me here extending the horizontal on the bottom of the hurricane lantern, extending the corners of the box vertically up and down to make sure they're hitting at the right points on the other boxes and near the lantern. I can even use this as an internal way to make sure that the corners are in the right way. And you'll see I actually discover something here. I've actually made a mistake here. The corner of my blue Carcassonne box lines up almost with my hurricane lantern. And so if I extend those lines, I can see in my drawing they're actually nowhere near each other. So I need to make an edit here. They're almost on the same line, with the edge of that box being just slightly to the right of it. This is a great example of how dropping verticals and horizontals can double check the framework that you've built in your underdrawing. So I go ahead and I edit at this point. My gesture drawing, while it got the shape in generally, was not faithful enough to the still life. And so I'm going to make this edit. I'm going to remeasure those angles very quickly, and I'm going to make it right. I take that angle again, and this time I place it with more confidence. I extend other verticals from the top of the box to double check my work and to see that I've got it now in proportion. I continue on by adding the other items in the still life: the spool of ribbon, the growler bottle behind the ribbon, and the left part or the right part of the large wooden S form that I'm using. And I'm doing this by extending verticals, seeing where they hit on certain things. I know that that growler starts there because it hits maybe about a quarter or a fifth of the way over towards the right on the spool of ribbon. And I'm putting in the S here based on where it's intersecting the box. I extend a vertical from that point, and I begin to place the object. Working with verticals and horizontals is extremely powerful. It does clutter up your paper with a lot of excess lines, but if you keep them light, it can serve as a template and save you a lot of headache when you're trying to get something in the right spot, or if something feels like it's just continuously not working out. I clean up a few of my lines on both the S, and notice that the spool of ribbon is actually not vertical. It's on this weird tilt, and I fix that. It's all these small, quick fixes that help me get a more faithful underdrawing, remembering that this isn't the final work. This is just us getting everything in the right spot. Look, I even extend a good horizontal from the corner bottom of my S to double check that it's intersecting the hurricane lantern at that exact point. Now, some people might say that this is overkill for an underdrawing, but add the marks while you can, because we all know the pain of getting to our finish, our really time intensive or in value or really beautiful finish quality work, and suddenly realizing, that person's eye is too high in their forehead, and fixing it at this stage is so much easier than fixing it when it's a finished drawing or painting. That leads us into our fourth technique, boxing in. Also, we sometimes call it the aquarium method, because it's like you're submerging objects in an aquarium. So we're going to stick with the term boxing in for the most part. Boxing in is when you take a complex object and you reduce it to a really fundamental form, and you use that fundamental form as a basis for then later completing a more complex object within the fundamental form. In this instance, I'm going to use this wooden S, which is a perfect object for demonstrating this. It has some decent complexity to it, but it can still fit inside a container, basically a rectangular prism that will help us isolate some of its details. Imagine the difficult object that you're working on is encased in a cube, or encased, in this case, in a rectangular prism. We're going to start by drawing that encasing object, the rectangular prism itself, which this is sort of why we have sometimes in the past called it the aquarium method. Right now you're building the aquarium, and it's much simpler to build an aquarium than it is to build the complex thing from scratch. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking some really general measurements off the S itself, and I'm just creating this thin rectangular prism, almost like a book standing on its end, because I think that's the shape of object that would best encase my S. At this point, I can start to subdivide that aquarium. The front face of it is really just the letter S, but flattened, and then I'm able to use its three-dimensionality to sort of extrude that S in space back towards those back edges. So you can just see me figuring out, okay, what is the general shape of the front side of that S? And because I know it's three-dimensional, then I'll be able to easily extend it because I've already understood the proportions and angles of the encasing object. So it's a really useful skill boxing in, and it can let you do all sorts of things, especially with curves, where it would be a little bit dangerous, or maybe not dangerous, but maybe hasty to assume you know everything about their curves before you've drawn them in an easier to draw object. You see this a lot in architectural drawing, for instance with like an archway. What architects will do when they're drawing is they'll draw a regular square doorway, and then they'll be able to inscribe the semicircle of the arch within it, knowing that their geometry at its base level is correct before they move on to the complexity of a curve. Now that I have its basic shape down, I can start to add some detail. It comes together quite quickly because I already have a template in place. The interiority of that S is even more simple because I can just extrude those lines along the vertices, or along the edges that I've established for myself in the cube itself. I decided to try another example, this time using the hurricane lantern, something which is cylindrical in nature, but here you see I'm not using a cylinder, I'm actually using a rectangular prism. So this boxing in method is best with rectangles and things with receding lines, because then you can see I'm making little notes here. Notice that bottom face is a little more upturned than the top face. You're seeing more of the bottom face when it's farther away from your horizon line or your eye level, and you're seeing a little bit less of the top because it's closer to my eye level. And that's true for what I see in the still life. Here I inscribe 4 edges where the inner circle meets the outer edges of the rectangular prism, and that'll form my base, and I do the same on the top. Something I find very helpful, especially for introductory drawing students, is marking off sort of an X and Y axis on your boxes when you do this method. It can help you find the center of an object if you really need to find the center of something. And in this case I did, because there are some interesting tapers within the hurricane lantern where things move towards the center. I start extending towards the top of the lantern and the handle, and following some of that wire work up there. And I can use this fundamental structure of the rectangular prism because it fits the shape of the cylinder so well. I extend the sides and the small pieces of metal that encase the glass of the prism, or of the hurricane lantern. I start adding the wires that hold the whole thing together. And finally, I add the interior glass bulb and the wick and base. And you can see I've got something that pretty well resembles that hurricane lantern. Now there are a few mishaps here, maybe from me going fast, but I think I've got the form pretty well down. That takes us to our final two tactics, seeing through and drawing with planar sections. So to start this section off, I want to share a little bit of an anecdote. So every semester I teach this course, I'll get a couple drawings from students who are new to representational drawing, to drawing from life, of a coffee cup or some other kind of cup or a vase that's sitting on a surface. And 9 times out of 10, the bottom will be completely flat. The top will be circular, and because we know that there's something that must go inside the coffee cup. And of course it has the handle. So what it ends up looking like on the paper is a complete collapsing of that into a conceptual idea where the coffee cup is round on top and then flat on bottom, like this. So that's where this technique of drawing through, number 5, drawing through comes in really handy. So we know that the coffee cup is also a cylinder, if we're going to reduce it to its basic form. So what we recommend students do is that they draw through the object and try to imagine the back edge that they can't see in real life. So we do have the top looking somewhat correct as a circle, an ellipse in this case, but at the bottom, imagine that you can see through it because it's the same shape on the bottom. And there you have it. That's really the total simplicity of drawing through. So we're going to use the coffee cup one more time to explain planar sections as kind of a companion tool to drawing through. So when we are talking about looking at a still life, we can do our best to use the techniques that we have to understand the objects that are going, that are intersecting with other objects or with the surface that they're sitting on. Here I am using that dotted line to talk about drawing through again, but this time I'm going to consider some planar sections of this coffee cup. Now, if you've done drawing in perspective before, you'll certainly recognize some of these techniques, and we'll cover perspective very thoroughly in this course. But for now, before we get there, here's some tricks to get us through. So when we talk about planar sections of an object, what we're really referencing is the fact that as planes that are sitting on a surface get closer to eye level, the flatter they appear. For instance, if we're seeing our coffee cup perfectly from the side, you'd notice that you wouldn't be able to see into the interior of that coffee cup. That top ellipse would just appear like a line, whereas as you get further above the coffee cup, it opens up. You can see its interiority, and that ellipse widens until you're hovering over it, and it becomes a full circle. So when we're taking planar sections of an object, we're really playing with what's closer to eye level and what's further from eye level. So if you feel as though you are having difficulty estimating, which openings, which curves, which objects sitting on the surface should look more upturned or which should look more flat, you can use a visual aid. Think of it like this. Are you closer to your eye level? And we're going to play a little bit with the camera here and the tape. My tape is obviously a circle, but when I put it directly at the camera's eye level here, it appears completely horizontal. As I move it below your eye level, you're starting to see more of that top face. And as I move it above your eye level, you're starting to see more of that bottom face. So this is all we mean of planar sections, that the coffee cup, it is useful for us to add some middle ground in between that top edge and that bottom edge to understand how we transition perspectively towards a flat line, towards the eye level, or away from a flat line and towards a circle in this case. Now, if you're wondering what this is for, it's really for those of us who have difficulty figuring out what should the curvature or what should the angle be down here where this object is intersecting the surface. Because remember, I want you to draw the surface that these things are sitting on. We don't want them to float in the void. Drawing through or seeing through and planar sections will help you understand how things are intersecting and why some things seem more upturned or more angular than the areas that are close to your eye level.